Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified Bourbon Steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, director of the cocktail collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. Stay tuned for Whiskey Chronicles and learn all about the history of the whiskey glass. Last week, Rolling Stone put out an article entitled The Best Whiskey Glasses for Your Next Party or Virtual Happy Hour. In it, they featured 4 different types of glasses: the Glencairn whiskey glass, the Marquise by Waterford Double Old Fashioned glass, the Venero Crystal whiskey glasses, and the 5 O'Clock Rocks whiskey glasses. From this list of 4, the Glencairn glass ranked best for direct sensory experience. However, the other glasses are said to be better for cocktails and drams with lots of ice in them. The article states, when it comes to drinking whiskey, your chosen glassware has a direct effect on your sensory experience. Furthermore, it stated, unfortunately, not all glassware is designed for an optimal nosing experience. Today's guest, Martin Duffy, will go into this more deeply. But for now, we're going to take a deeper dive into the chronicles and learn more about the history of the whiskey glass.
For centuries of whiskey's history, people enjoyed it from a drinking bowl with handles on both sides, called a quaich, spelled Q-U-A-I-C-H, but sounding quaich. It comes from the Gaelic word for cup. The first quaichs were made from wood and for functional use only. But as time went on, they became symbols and took on new meanings. They became symbols of status and wealth. The upper-class quaichs were made of rare or culturally significant types of wood, precious metals, or both. Eventually, people grew loyal to the quaich as their means of drinking whiskey, just as many of today's whiskey drinkers are loyal to the Glencairn Glass. To learn more about the fascinating history of the whiskey glass, we've invited the current North American brand representative for Glencairn Crystal to the show. Welcome, Martin.
Yes, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, kids.
Great. So we wanted to check with you to see what exactly the history of Glencairn is, because I know it's on its 20th anniversary this year. So how did the glass come to be, and how did it get to where it is?
Well, it's funny, since you're talking about the history of whiskey glasses and whiskey vessels. It came about in that there was just a young kid with a dream by the name of Raymond Davidson, who back in about 1981, I believe it was, he had been a crystal salesman, and he started his own company making decanters and cut crystal tumblers, sold mostly through to a lot of the Scotch whiskey companies throughout Scotland. And about 15, 16 years later, he's looking around, he was noticing, whiskey was making a return to prominence after, a kind of a slow, long slide, losing its place on top to vodka, that he noticed that there was no whiskey glass. Yeah, people would be drinking out of a rocks glass. Usually, especially here in the States, you got those old, thick, dirty tumblers, which were great because they're a little harder to break, but right. They weren't actually conducive to really enjoying a whiskey. Then you had the brandy snifter. It's been around forever. It really wasn't conducive to whiskey. It was a brandy snifter.
Yeah,
so
and even for brandy, the physics of it aren't right.
If you go to cognac, you don't see anyone using that glass.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
right.
Interesting.
They'll have the smaller tulip glass. So, anyways, he came up with a general design for the Glencairn glass. But he goes, who the heck is going to be using a glass like this? People don't use that. So he put it up on the shelf. And about 4 or 5 years later, his son Paul came to work at the company. He sees the glass. He says, Dad, what's this? He goes, that's an idea I had. I don't know. And so next thing you know, they turn around. Paul invites a number of master blenders to put their 2 cents in and, maybe help with the design, maybe create the right width for the bowl, the length of the neck, the size of the mouth. Should it have a stem? Should it just have the thick base? And voila, the Glencairn glass was born. And it really got its coming out party at Whiskey Fest. We owe a lot to the folks at Whiskey Fest, especially John and Amy Hansel. They made the association to whiskey pretty permanent. And to this day, most whiskey events are going to use a Glencairn glass. And
or the newer mini Glencairn.
It's the wee Glencairn.
The wee Glencairn.
Which I love, because if you have little tiny pockets, you can just slide it in there. And it's very portable. Very nice.
And off you go.
Yeah. I must say, as many people know, we just finished a crowdfunding for a TV pilot that we're doing. And while we're waiting for the pandemic to subside and get back to production, we're working on this podcast. But one of the treats that we got for people to incentivize them to donate was a wee Glencairn glass. And I've been using mine nightly until I ran out of whiskey last week. So I was like, well, this is good because I won't drink too much because it's not big enough to but then I just kept refilling it. So I don't know how well that worked.
And those were
Kerry, I'm shedding barley tears for you right now.
Wow. I want to see that. Are you crying barley, Phil? That's weird.
Yes, pearled.
As long as they're not salty, I'll have some.
The wee Glencairn actually came about because the tasting rooms in Scotland were giving out samples, and over in the UK, a standard pour is only 3/4 of an ounce.
Right.
So about half of what you get here. So their samples were even smaller, and they were using the Glencairn glass in their tasting rooms. So they thought, hey, can you make the glass smaller to make the little sample seem bigger? And voila, we came up with the wee Glencairn, and it caught on very well over in Scotland and all the Scottish distilleries. Next thing you know, over here in the US, people love them. Stephen Beam at Limestone Branch, he must go through 3 pallets a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's 3,000.
Why does he need? Is he losing some to breakage, walkage, or does he sell them as souvenirs?
He sells them. Basically, he hands one to everybody taking a tour. He offers them the chance of buying that particular glass that they're holding for $5 or buying a brand new clean one in the visitor center for $7. And so people get $5. It's a bargain.
I have another question about whiskey glasses in particular, but there are now several brands in the market that emphasize their engineering, the engineering that went into their design. Now, I have tried many of them, but the Glencairn still is king of the hill by a lot. Tell me, was engineering an element of the Glencairn's development, or was it more analog and it just so happens that the engineering was perfect?
Well, it's funny. I've never really sat down with Ray and asked him, how he came up with the initial concept. But obviously, a lot of it makes sense. If you look at it, the Glencairn glass is kind of based on a cognac or Armagnac glass with some subtle differences. You don't have a straight shoot going straight up from the bulb. Like you do in those glasses. Obviously, you don't have a stem. Everything's a little more gradual. And obviously, the mouth of the glass is wider. A lot of that all stemmed out of the observations of the master blenders. I mean, they came in, they refined it. There was at least 5 master blenders from 5 different blending houses.
Wow.
And all competing.
So its style and its form is quite literally dictated by expert opinion.
It really is, yeah. And that's why it hasn't changed. We haven't changed anything about it. Once in a while, you'll see us come out with a different colored one. I don't know if you guys were aware of the minor mishap we had on Black Friday when we announced that we had 1,000 black Glencairn glasses available.
I did hear about that, but I didn't actually see one.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people who didn't see one. The guy who did our IT, he guaranteed us our website would hold up, but it just crashed. We've never had that kind of crowd slam into our server all at once like that. So no, they were all sold, but I guess some people were trying to get online for 3 hours in the middle of the night.
So was it a mistake to make it, or they made it on purpose, but they're just not making more?
Well, what we do is we will create test glasses. So We actually have a few green ones, which I kind of
nice.
like. Yeah, I kind of like them. We have the blue, which is a cobalt blue. That is a standard. That is and we may bring the black glass back as a standard as well.
Are these
cool.
transparent still, or are they solid?
Now they're pretty solid. The black is pretty solid. You can't really, you'd have maybe if you had a very, very, very bright light behind it. But the whole idea behind the black one is for blind tasting. So that the color won't affect it'll simply by sense of smell.
Is the green also solid, or is it any transparency?
Yeah, it's more transparent.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's also great marketing because at some point these will become collector's items. I'm thinking of LPs from the LP releases from the 70s. Now and again, a band and a record company would release one in orange vinyl or blue vinyl or multicolored vinyl, and now people are lurking on eBay looking for these things.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a great idea. I'd love to see that. But the guys in Scotland, you got to remember they're coming from a crystal background. That's what they have always made. In fact, a big chunk of their bread and butter is still making crystal decanters, very elaborate crystal decanters for the whiskey companies. If you see any of Glenn Farkless's older expressions, they're in these beautiful crystal decanters that Glencairn made.
Nice.
We made an actual whiskey decanter for Jim Rutledge's retirement party, and that alone cost between $3,000 and $4,000.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was gorgeous though. I mean, it was all hand etched, and they put gold inlay, the Four Roses logo on the back.
Beautiful.
His name.
Wow.
Marty,
Yes.
like many whiskey brand ambassadors, you were at one time a professional actor.
I was.
Can you tell us about your journey from there to here? How you went from acting to being what's now an internationally known spirits educator?
Well, a lot of the guys I started off with, like Spike McClure out of New York or Simon Brooking.
We just interviewed Simon Brooking.
Yep. Yeah. So Simon and I, we came up together as Masters of Scotch for Johnny Walker. And he jumped.
You helped define the category.
We did. There really were no American brand ambassadors for any spirits that I know of during that time. This was from the mid-'90s to the early aughts. You had guys coming over from Scotland. You had Evan Kotnak, who was our mentor, and Anthony Burnett was with Glenmorangie. But other than that, I mean, when I was a bartender in the 90s, I got almost no training. I think Anthony Burnett was my first training on whiskey, and that wasn't probably until the late 90s. And even then, it was a 15, 20-minute little presentation.
Yeah, it was very common at the time.
Yeah.
It's still common. I took my bartending certification class 5 or 6 years ago, and I knew more about whiskey than the guys teaching it, and I had to correct both my teachers on several things.
But to go back a little, so yeah, I started doing improv at Second City in the 80s. And I actually, I'd like to throw this out, little name dropping. When I was at Second City, Steve Carell and I performed together in a show for about 3-4 months. Also, who was in our group, which is kind of funny, because I wondered what happened to him for a while. I'm not very tech savvy myself, but there was a little fellow by the name of Dick Costello. We used to call him Sniffles. He went on to be the CEO of Twitter.
Oh, wow.
Worth millions of dollars. We used to just tease him as being a big nerd. And that he could buy and sell me in the marketplace.
What you're saying is that he didn't have one character. He didn't specialize in one character. He specialized in 140.
Yes. Very good. Look at that. Yeah. So like any good actor at the time, I discovered bartending. And so I started bartending to support my acting. And eventually I
Never heard of that. Never heard of that before.
Yeah, I know.
I think I'm the only one who did it backwards. I've been in the entertainment industry for about 20 years. And about 6 years ago, I was like, I'm getting tired of this. I want to go do bartending. And everyone's like,
Wow.
but you're already in the industry. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting tired of it.
Well,
I want to go do something fun.
I used to think a bar was like a stage. I used to love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are a lot of actors who think, I'm still in theater. I'm just behind the stick.
Right. And then the bartending led to, I was thirsty for knowledge, so to speak, as far as the spirits I was serving. I had no idea. It was back in the day when you considered Southern Comfort was a bourbon. That's what people thought. So I saw an ad in the paper that a marketing company was looking for a group of people to run around in terry cloth kilts, run into bars, and buy people scotches. And that was the Johnny Walker Kilted Clan. There'd be about three of us with just these really horrible, cheap kilts on, running in, buying people drinks. And that led to presentations. Then we started doing Johnny Walker mentor events. Did that on and off for 7 years with while working for other whiskey brands as well. And then 2003, they wanted 7 people to go full time. So they hired us, one in all the major cities. You guys probably know Steve Beal out there in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Steve
Indeed.
Was one of the originals. Spike in New York, myself in Chicago, Brad Jarvis in Boston, James McCartney, the only true Scotsman. Called him the Grey Seal because he would swim naked in the waters off of Jura one day and rise out of the waters like Poseidon. Very old, wrinkly Poseidon, but a Poseidon nonetheless.
I hear he packs quite the trident.
Yeah, I don't know if you call that a trident. Now, there was one that was old. Rick Edwards. Rick Edwards was one of ours. Rick is now with Strand, but he was with Glenlivet for a good number of years. Anyways, they need us full time. They brought us to Scotland. We did the Malt Advocate course at Royal Lochnagar Distillery. And that was in December, right before Christmas. And we were supposed to start January 2nd. And the one thing they didn't tell us is, what do we do? They trained us on whiskey. Now, what are we supposed to do? They said, just make the job your own. And that's what we all did in our own region of the countries. I had 12 states at the time. That was my everything from the Dakotas through West Virginia, basically my territory.
You kind of had a Midwestern arc.
I did. I had a thermos presented to me by the part-time mayor of Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, my friend's sister lives there.
I might have seen her because there weren't a lot of people at Fargo. But it was a fun time. It was a great time. I did that. I spent 2 years over in Ireland as the reserve brand ambassador, and they never had ambassadors over there either at that time. So I kind of held the little distinction of being the first brand ambassador in Ireland, at least for Diageo. And then went on to become a national brand ambassador for Benedictine for 2 glorious years.
I'm looking at a bottle of it right now.
Good old Benedictine.
I always think that sounds like something you're supposed to get at the doctor.
Benedictine?
I don't know. Yeah, just the way it sounds. Like something you're supposed to put on a cut.
Come here. What was that? What was that stuff they used to spray on a cut?
Something sounding similar, I think.
There used to be a...
Benedine?
Yeah,
Benedine, maybe?
Plug that in somehow. Did that, and then for 8 years I was co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo, along with the always glamorous and beautiful Dave Schmier, Bourbon.
Creator of Redemption.
Yeah. And then 5 years ago, the Davidson family reached out to me and asked, hey, would you like to work for us in North America? Because it's a small company, and so they would send one of the brothers out, traveling the globe. They'd send them to Asia or here, and it's a lot of territory for a little company.
Yeah.
So, and even with me here, I mean, it's still a big continent for little old me, but I get around.
Curious, you North America. What are sales like south of the U.S. border?
I've had some tequila mezcal folks reach out to us. A couple stores in Central America have asked for the glassware. And then South America, I don't know if it's a language barrier, because I know poquito Spanish, Espanol. But I do know they do love their whiskey, and especially Scotch whiskey, in a good number of countries down there. But as far as Glencairn's reach, we don't do a lot of advertising. But, that would be one area that I think we really need to.
Curious, because whiskey sales were growing everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're even, some of these countries, Mexico, for instance, they're developing their own whiskey making traditions.
Yep.
And I'm just curious about,
Well, it's very big. I know that they're a good reach over in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, India, and Australia. Australia.
Also a center of whiskey production.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it too. I think maybe as the companies or the distilleries spring up making the whiskey. I mean, right now in South America, I don't know of too many. In fact, I don't know if I could name one of a whiskey distillery in South America.
Neither could I.
No.
So that could be the thing, that as these distilleries spring up, they bring in the glassware, and then they educate folks on how to drink whiskey,
Yeah, it could be.
Because, I mean, again, in the 1990s, I had been bartending for 10 years by the end of that decade, and I only knew what I was being taught through these marketing companies, because there really was no other way.
Right.
I didn't, well, of course, the Glencairn Glass didn't exist, but, as far as any other accoutrements, anything to go with whiskey, had no idea. I was drinking Booker Manhattans, 10-ounce Booker Manhattans in like
10 ounce?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it was because I knew
that's a big gulp.
Oh, I knew it was strong, but no one explained proof or strength of whiskey to me. So I knew it was strong. I did not realize how strong it was. So
I just one and done with that bad boy.
Well, I'd have 3 of them actually. Now I look back and I go, oh my God, how am I alive?
Right?
Yeah.
Do you know how the Glencairn Glass got its name?
Well, I had heard one story that Glen and Karen were 2 different street signs near where Raymond lived. But if you break that down, Glen is a river valley, as we all know from the various scotches, and a Karen is, if you go to Scotland or even Ireland, you'll see little mounds of stones that have been erected. That is in memory of a departed loved one, much like you'd see a white cross along the expressway. So that is what that is, a Kieran. So it's standing stones. That's what it's called.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is very pretty. Valley of the Standing Stones. A fitting name for a beautiful crystal.
Okay, so 2011, you started working as a producer with the Chicago Independent Spirits Expo. The landscape was much different.
Very different.
Independent Spirits 2011 was still, most states didn't know how to license distilleries because so few states were home to distilleries. Now they are in I don't know what the latest count is, but it's north of 3,000 American, craft distillers. And now it's 2020. Can you tell us briefly about the evolution you experienced as a producer of that expo?
Well, it's interesting. So actually, you got to give a lot of credit to Mr. Schmier, Mr. Dave Schmier. Dave had his own small brand. He had a vodka brand called Orange V that I often tease him. That was the first St. Joseph baby aspirin flavored vodka I've ever tasted. But he noticed, where was he gonna? What spirit shows were out there for vodka or gins or any small brands? You had Whiskey Fest and Whiskey Live. You had a lot of whiskey shows starting to pop up. but there was none for the small guys. And there were, it's actually surprises me now thinking that there were guys like St. George was around then, and McCarthy's Clear Creek out of Portland. I mean, these guys were around. Even Fritz Maytag was, had a small distillery in his brewery. But if you weren't making whiskey, where did you showcase your wares? So Dave started with his brand and maybe one or two others in the corner of a nightclub in New York. And he called it the Indie Spirit Expo. So 4 years later, 2011, he asked me to come out to New York and work his table for him for redemption, because it had grown. I think he had like 50 to 60 brands by 2011. Huge. I loved it so much. I thought it was amazing. It blew my mind. Even at that point, I thought, oh my God, you're making vodka from honey? I thought, oh my God, that's crazy. I never heard of that, not even thinking about it. So I convinced him to bring it to Chicago that fall. And so we asked Mike Miller over at of Delilah's fame. He is part owner of another place called Bottom Lounge, and it had a nice big space. And we said, can we take over the whole bar? And we had about 60 to 70 brands, including brands that just launched. Paul Heltko's Few Spirits had just launched.
Love Paul's work.
Yeah, now that brand is an international brand.
It is. It's in the Samson and Surrey portfolio.
You're correct. And at that point, though, it had been on the market for less than a month by the time our expo happened in September 2011.
Oh, wow.
And a number of other, small-time brands. And it just grew from there. Every year, we could see it just by the number of attendees and the number of exhibitors that we had. So finally, about, I want to say, 2017, maybe 2017, we had about 150 exhibitors. We moved to the Hilton Hotel downtown, and we maxed out the room. A 10,000 square foot room. We had to move out into the foyer.
Oh, wow. And
we just didn't have enough room anymore. And as you said, now I had heard it's over 2,000, but who knows? It could be it might be about 3,000 brands, because not every brand has a distillery.
No, indeed. The less and less a secret now, but there are all these mezcals and tequilas coming out of Mexico, but there are a handful of makers.
Right. Yeah. There's a bunch of little mezcal, Lawrenceburg, Indiana's, basically.
Yes.
MGPs down there.
Exactly.
The same thing in Ireland. Now you look at Ireland and...
Oh, sure. Look at Middleton.
All that whiskey and the Irish whiskey aisle of your local store, and you go, really? There's this many distilled? No, not really.
Yeah, it's getting pretty big now, finally.
Well, they have about 20 distilleries that are up and running, but as far as having actual whiskey that qualifies, or actual juice that qualifies as Irish whiskey, which has to be served for a minimum of 3 years, you still only have about, I want to say, 5 or 6 tops at this point.
Yeah.
And the rest of it, so much of it is just being sourced. It's being sourced.
It still breaks my heart how Irish whiskey was the number one whiskey in the world, and then we come along with Prohibition and just killed it.
Yeah, in the 1800s, it outsold Scotch in Scotland.
Yep.
And had been praised by the likes of Peter the Great and Queen Elizabeth I. I mean, it's nuts. And the fact that, but it also came, I think it's a great, what do they call those kind of learning tales? Those tales that you learn from.
Teachable moments?
Yeah. One of those fables that, teaches you, hey, don't rest on your laurels, which the Irish whiskey industry did. That a lot of them, when Prohibition came around, and obviously they lost the entire British market once they had a falling out with the English. And at that time, the British still ruled about 25% of the globe, which is insane.
Oh yeah, it was very definitely, it was a series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, the perfect.
It wasn't just U.S. prohibition.
Right.
But they could have, I mean, had they just put their noggins to it, some of them could have tapped into other markets, South America, Africa, India. Oh, not India. That was British still too, but other parts of Europe. But they just didn't have it in them. So some of them, including George Rowe, just shut down. And that was the largest distillery, I believe, in the world at the time, was the original George Rowe distillery.
So sad.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, it's a cautionary tale. That's it. That's what I was saying.
A cautionary tale.
There you go.
Yes.
Can you rehab this to make me sound smarter?
I can.
Who's going to make? Kerry's going to make all of us sound smarter.
Under filter.
Is there? We should be using that because it took me a long time. All right. So, how has COVID-19 affected your life, your career, and business? And where did you see yourself going before this pandemic? And where do you see yourself going now with the pandemic situation being part of your going forward life?
Well, I saw myself going down to New Orleans before this all started.
For Tales of the Cocktail, presumably.
No, I was going down for the New Orleans Bourbon Festival, and that was
yes, in late winter.
It was March. I think it was going to be March 12th, and on March 11th, I think I was flying down on the 12th. I think, and on the 11th, it was canceled. And so, how it's affected me is that a big chunk of my job is to travel throughout the U.S. and Canada, go wherever the whiskey shows are. And I had, at that time, there was loads of whiskey shows going on. I was going to go down to New Orleans for the New Orleans Bourbon Festival, followed by Whiskey on Ice in Minnesota. Then we were going to have Whiskey Week here in Chicago, which would lead up to Whiskey Fest. There was a whole week full of various whiskey events taking place right here in Chicago during that time. And I was going to leave the next day after Whiskey Fest for the American Craft Spirits Association conference in Portland. And then I wasn't sure whether I was going to go to them or not, but there was Whiskey Fest / the Big Smoke in Fort Lauderdale, the American Whiskey Convention in Philadelphia, American Distillers Institute Convention in New Orleans again, and then
there's a big show in Vegas.
The Nth in Vegas.
I was supposed to go to that one. Finally going to go this year.
All of those, I had to cancel all my flights and hotels. I had to cancel a family reunion in Ireland in July.
Oh, that sucks.
And so, how did it affect me? The thing is, when I'm not traveling, I work from home. So I'm just home a lot more than I had planned. What my concern is going forward is one for my own company, for Glencairn. This does affect them because a big part of our industry, a big part of our business are all the small distilleries. But the other thing too, with all the traveling I've done over the years and doing the Indie Spirit Expo, is getting to know all these small distilleries. And I really just worry for them. I just hope they squirreled some money away for a rainy day. I've talked to a number of them in the last week. They're keeping afloat with hand sanitizer and maybe some storefront sales. But, there are some that for which that just isn't possible. And my heart really breaks for them. It really, really does. And I wish there was, just something we could do for them other than getting their names out there, which I try as much as possible on social media. But going forward, I don't know. I'm hoping all this ends soon. I really do. I think we have to open up and let the chips fall where they may. We're a human race, God damn it. We've seen worse than this. Come on.
We're the human race. Let's get running.
Yeah, exactly.
My last question
Yes,
is
sir.
about cocktails. I like to talk to our guests about cocktails, not what their favorite cocktail is, because I think that's frankly a ridiculous question. But briefly, talk about your favorite cocktails. Do you have a favorite type, stirred, shaken, or built, etc.?
Yeah, it's funny. Again, going back to the 90s, because all my customers always asked for them shaken, I always thought, oh, that must be the way, huh? It must be
Indeed.
good to have that field of ice on top.
Just a couple of years ago, I was visiting a storied Los Angeles bar, not one of the craft bars, but and I ordered. I was like, okay, I'm going to play it safe here because clearly this place is behind the curve. So I ordered and all they had on the the only quality whiskey of any sort on the back bar was Jack Daniel's. So I said, I'll have a Jack Daniel's Old Fashioned. Well, my stirred cocktail got shaken and then converted to a highball with a with a float of gunned soda.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess it's been over a decade now of the rise and possibly the fall of the mixologist. Which I wasn't crazy about because I thought a lot of them were putting more effort into making a great great creation as opposed to being a really good bartender. I missed having personalities behind the bar. A lot of times, as soon as they made their drink, they'd stand there at attention with their hands behind their back and I go, "Well, what's the matter? Don't you have a joke? What happened to a bartender who had a joke?"
Yeah. And what I think too, I've noticed some of these, newer bars that are coming out of chains that are owned by, properties, and they try to make more and more. I feel like they're not doing a good job on training anybody, let alone the bartenders. I went into this whiskey bar of all places. I was having a phase where I wanted Manhattans all the time. And I went in and I asked for a bullet rye perfect Manhattan. And he's like, "Oh, you got to have it perfect." And this is like the waiter guy. And I was like, "Yes, I want it perfect." I was like, look, little boy. He's probably 20. It's not even old enough to be, bartending. So he was like, "Oh," making a joke. And I said, "Yeah, actually, if you don't tell him that, it's not going to be right because that is actually the type of drink that I want." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so then I went about explaining to him the variations of the Manhattan and perfect and the regular and the dry and all of that. And he's like, "Oh, I had no idea." And I said, "Yeah, that's the problem. You can't be taking drink orders if you're going to be making fun of people."
Yeah. I used to equate bartenders who didn't know how to make drinks and didn't know the lingo to going into getting your car fixed by a mechanic and you say, "Yeah, you know what? I think my brake pads need fixing." "Oh, you put pads in your brakes?" That's a real thing. The pads. Like shoulder pads? No, pads. Never mind.
So what are your go-tos?
My go-to, one, as far as, I like everything drier now. When I was younger, I had the whiskey sours and, whiskey and Coke or whiskey and 7. I love Manhattan still. I love Manhattans with Amaros, the drier Amaros.
Black Manhattans.
Black Manhattan.
Oh, those are very good.
I like a really good dry. I love Tanqueray is still my gold standard of dry gin. That's what I like. Okay. I'll drink a dry martini with olive.
This is a whiskey show, but what's your opinion on Tanqueray 10?
I love Tanqueray. Oh, you know what? One time I was in Scotland with Gregor Kotnak. Gregor worked for Diageo, or still does. And I was up there visiting with him and his wife, Paula. They're at a little house up there. And he had a case of Tanqueray number 10. And he drank Tanqueray number 10 with tonic and lemon. And I never had so much gin while being in Scotland. I thought it was so weird. When I came back, I thought, Jesus, I think I spent 90% of my time drinking gin in Scotland. Where it's made, anyways. So it's probably apropos. But I love Tanqueray number 10. I love the two Tanquerays. Always did. I helped launch Tanqueray number 10 when it first came out in the early aughts. Okay. So I was always a big fan. But as far as whiskey cocktails, Manhattan, obviously. I'm not a big fan of old fashions just because they tend, again, to be sweet. Oh, actually, a good old Rob Roy.
Oh, yeah. Rob Roy's good.
With Johnny Walker Black, typically. I like, again, drier, darker, smokier whiskeys from Scotland. And then that's really about it. Otherwise, I'm drinking something neat or on the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
I think my time with Benedictine kind of took the shine off of cocktails for me. They just felt
Okay.
a little too sweet.
So you don't. You're not a big fan of the Vieux Carré.
No, I'm not. It's okay, and obviously it was something I pushed, but again, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's in the back of my mind. I think sugar is going to lead to a worse hangover the next day.
I think that's it. I know that in my early 20s, I was all about the sugary drinks. And then once I hit 30 and discovered Scotch whiskey, I was like, why haven't I been just drinking this? And now I go places, and if they only have like a horrible blend or a horrible bourbon, and that's all they have for choices, then I just don't drink. And everyone's like, but you can get a cocktail. I'm like, with what they have? No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, you know what, too? I've really gotten into, even though we pushed this back in the day, we used to do the Talisker Nip and Pint. We paired up Talisker 10 to a different beer. There's a bar here in Chicago called the Duke of Perth that has the Bellhaven Wee Heavy. Bellhaven Wee Heavy with Talisker Distillers Edition. That is a dangerous combination. Okay. I could drink that all night, and sometimes I have. And it's
all right. It sounds more like a proposition than a cocktail.
It is.
All right.
We want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, Martin.
Oh, thanks for asking.
It's been wonderful. And I'm very excited to have, a whole case worth of glasses from the Glencairn. I actually collect a whole bunch. So I always feel every time I can collect one that's got, somebody's logo on it, I'm like, oh, here's another one.
I have a collection of branded Glencairns that at the bottom carry the text, "Do not take."
Yes, I don't take those. I actually have had people take my own personal Glencairn glasses from an event that I was hosting from my seat, from my table.
That I've not done.
Like, I don't believe it. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We enjoyed having you. And hopefully after this COVID-19 thing is over, we will get to see you pretty soon.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Philip. You guys be good.
Thank you, Martin.
Stay safe out there.
We'll see you soon.
You too.
All right. Cheers.
Well, everyone, that does it for our show today. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please tune in next time and hit subscribe.
Please visit our website to see our show notes on today's podcast at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include a link to the Rolling Stone article and the other resources for today's Whiskey Chronicles, as well as a link to the Glencairn website.
As always, you can see our upcoming topics and guest roster and links to past shows. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, Salam.
Slanchavan.
Spirits of Whiskey is a production of First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available on Anchor, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts can be heard.